If you are finding gray hairs in your 20s or 30s, do not reach for the dye just yet. Because sometimes, what looks like aging is not really aging. Sometimes it is a signal. A signal that your pigment system is under stress. A signal that your hair follicles are missing something they need. And one of the first things many dermatologists think about when gray hair shows up unusually early is not a fancy shampoo, not a miracle oil, not a viral hack. It is a vitamin. Vitamin B12. Now before anyone says, so this is the vitamin that magically turns white hair black again, slow down. That is not how this works. B12 is not hair paint in a capsule. But if your gray hair is showing up young, and if a deficiency is part of the reason, correcting that deficiency can sometimes slow the process, and in some cases, partially reverse what is happening. That is a very different claim. And it is the difference between science and wishful thinking. By the end of this video, you are going to understand three things. First, why hair turns gray in the first place. Second, why B12 matters more than most people realize when graying starts early. And third, the one detail almost everyone misses when they try to fix low B12 on their own. Because for a lot of people, the real problem is not what supplement they buy. It is why they became deficient in the first place. Let's start with what gray hair actually is. Your hair gets its color from pigment cells inside the follicle called melanocytes. Think of each hair follicle like a tiny color factory. As long as that factory has workers, raw materials, and energy, it keeps making melanin, and your hair comes out with color. Brown, black, blonde, red, whatever your natural shade is, that all depends on melanin. But when those pigment cells slow down, get damaged, or stop working, the factory goes quiet. Less melanin gets packed into the growing hair. Then less. Then none. And the strand that comes out looks gray, silver, or white. For most people, that happens gradually with age. That part is normal. But when it starts much earlier than expected, especially in the teens, 20s, or early 30s, dermatologists start asking a different question. Not, how old are you? But, why is this happening now? That is where the conversation changes. Because early graying is not always just genetics. Genetics absolutely matter. If one or both of your parents went gray early, your odds go up. But genetics are not the only lever. Smoking has been linked to premature graying. High stress appears to play a role. Autoimmune conditions can be involved. Low iron stores can matter. Thyroid problems can matter. And several studies have found that people with premature graying often have lower levels of certain nutrients, especially vitamin B12. This is why the title of this video matters. Not because B12 is some forbidden secret dermatologists hate. Honestly, dermatologists do not hate this. They check for it. What they do hate is when the internet takes a real association, turns it into a fantasy cure, and leaves people disappointed. So let's talk about what the evidence actually says. A clinical review on premature graying reported that vitamin B12 deficiency has been associated with early graying, and it pointed out something striking. In people with pernicious anemia, a condition that causes serious B12 deficiency, gray hair before age 50 was reported much more often than in controls. That should get your attention. Then there was a case control study in young patients with premature candidies, another term for early graying, where vitamin B12 levels were significantly lower than in people without it. The same study also found lower folic acid and biotin levels. Another study found lower B12 again, along with lower ferritin and calcium. And yet another clinical paper found low ferritin and thyroid-related abnormalities in a meaningful share of patients. Do you see the pattern? The pattern is not one magical vitamin causes every gray hair. The pattern is that early graying can be the visible tip of a deeper nutritional or metabolic issue. And B12 keeps showing up in that conversation. Now here is the part most videos skip. Why would B12 have anything to do with hair color at all? Vitamin B12 helps your body make DNA. It helps keep nerve cells healthy. It helps your body make healthy blood cells. And when B12 runs low, rapidly renewing systems suffer. Hair follicles are not dead threads stuck in your scalp. They are active biological structures. They need oxygen, nutrients, cell turnover, and normal signaling. If those systems are compromised, the follicle does not perform at full capacity. And while the exact link between B12 and pigment loss is still not fully mapped out cell by cell, the association is strong enough that clinicians take it seriously, especially when graying seems premature. A simple way to think about it is this. If your hair follicle is a factory, B12 is not the paint. It is part of the infrastructure. It helps keep the whole operation running. When the infrastructure fails, pigment production can fail with it. And sometimes hair changes show up before people connect the dots. Before the tingling hands. Before the fatigue gets bad. Before the memory fog. Before the blood work finally tells the story. That matters, because B12 deficiency is not trivial. It can affect your nerves. It can affect your energy. It can affect your blood cells. And if it goes on long enough, some of the nerve damage may not be fully reversible. So gray hair in a young person should not always be dismissed as cosmetic. Sometimes it is cosmetic. Sometimes it is inherited. But sometimes it is your body tapping you on the shoulder. Now let's make this practical. Who is most likely to be low in B12? People who eat little or no animal food are at higher risk, because B12 is naturally found mainly in animal products. People with pernicious anemia are at higher risk. People with stomach or intestinal problems can be at higher risk. People who have had certain stomach or bowel surgeries can be at higher risk. People with conditions like Crohn's disease or celiac disease can be at higher risk. And yes, even younger people can run low if intake has been poor for a while or absorption is impaired. This is why two people can take the exact same supplement and get totally different results. One person simply was not eating enough B12 and responds well. The other person has an absorption problem and keeps swallowing pills that never solve the real issue. That is the detail almost everybody misses. It is not just, what form should I buy? It is, can my body absorb what I am taking? That question matters more than the label hype. Let me say something that may save you a lot of time and money. If your gray hair is related to B12 deficiency, the goal is not to randomly flood your body with supplements and hope your roots get the message. The goal is to confirm the deficiency and fix the reason behind it. That usually starts with testing. A clinician may look at serum B12 and, depending on the situation, may also consider things like a complete blood count and sometimes follow-up markers if the picture is unclear. And because premature graying is not only about B12, many doctors also think about ferritin, folate, thyroid function, and sometimes vitamin D or other contributors depending on the history. This matters because if you treat the wrong problem, you can stay frustrated for months. Now let's talk expectations. If you correct a B12 deficiency today, do the gray strands already sitting on your head instantly change color? No. Hair does not work that way. Hair is slow. Very slow. A strand growing out of your scalp is like a timeline. What happened biologically months ago is already baked into the length you can see today. So if improvement happens, it usually shows up in new growth first. At the root. Over time. Not overnight. Not in a week. And not because the vitamin died anything. Because the follicle environment improved. There are case reports showing repigmentation after B12 treatment in true deficiency states, including one classic report in which premature gray hair returned to normal after treatment for pernicious anemia. But a case report is not a promise. It is an example. A clue. Not a guarantee. That distinction matters. Because if your early graying is mostly genetic, B12 will not overpower your DNA. If it is being driven by smoking, ongoing stress, thyroid disease, or low iron stores, B12 alone will not fix the whole picture. And if your B12 is perfectly normal, taking more and more probably will not turn your bathroom sink into a fountain of black hair. This is exactly why honest health information sounds less exciting than clickbait. But it is far more useful. So what should you actually do if you are going gray young? First, do not panic. Second, do not assume it is just aging if it started unusually early. Third, do not assume one supplement is the answer before you know the cause. If B12 is low, then yes, correcting it matters. And how you correct it depends on why it is low. If low intake is the problem, food and standard supplements may help. B12 is found in fish, meat, poultry, eggs, milk, and other dairy foods. Fortified cereals, fortified nutritional yeast, and other fortified foods can also help, especially for people who eat little or no animal food. But if absorption is the problem, the plan may need to look very different. Some people need higher dose supplementation. Some need prescription treatment. Some need injections. And this is the specific form detail people get completely backwards. The internet loves arguing about methylcobalamin versus cyanocobalamin as if that is the whole story. For most people, the bigger issue is not supplement tribalism. It is delivery. If your body cannot absorb B12 properly, the fanciest gummy in the world is not a strategy. It is decoration. That is why the smartest move is not buying the most expensive bottle. It is finding out whether you are actually deficient and why. There is another point here that deserves attention. Medline Plus is very clear that normal age-related graying is largely genetic, and vitamins do not stop the march of time. That is important. Because the promise, this vitamin stops gray hair, is too broad to be true. What is true is narrower, but more powerful. If you are graying unusually early, nutritional deficiencies are worth investigating. Vitamin B12 is one of the most important ones. And if B12 deficiency is part of the cause, correcting it may help protect the pigment system from further unnecessary stress. That is a much more honest message. And honestly, a much more hopeful one. Because it means early graying is not always something you should simply cover up and ignore. Sometimes it is information. Useful information. Now, before we close, there are two mistakes people make that keep them stuck. The first is treating young gray hair like a beauty problem only. If you are 22, 27, 31, and seeing more gray than seems normal for your family, that is not always a salon issue. It may be worth a medical conversation. The second mistake is chasing miracle cures while ignoring the basics. If you smoke, if your diet is inconsistent, if you are chronically stressed, if you are running on poor sleep, if your iron stores are low, if your thyroid is off, your hair follicles are operating in a storm. Even if B12 is part of the answer, it may not be the whole answer. Health problems love to travel in groups. And the body rarely reads internet headlines as neatly as we do. So here is the bottom line. The vitamin in this video is B12. Not because it magically erases every gray hair. Not because it works.